And every time he comes into our studios, there are three things you can be guaranteed he would have. He'll have his bag, he'll have his hat, and he'll come with his documents and a pen. So that's four, actually, not three. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
I'm taking it.
Oh, but it's here. I can see it. It's resting nicely. I hope you're well, sir.
I'm doing well.
Doing well.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us here on the show and for always availing yourself for discussions like this. Last week, the technical director at the technical advisor at the finance ministry, Dr. Gani, was with us, and he spoke about the MOU that's been signed between Ghana and the Official Creditors Committee. That has put us in a position where we can continue our discussions with the IMF and get the next tranche of releases to come through. For you, and I always say that based on our history, we learn. What's your reading of how the discussions with the creditor committee has gone and what this MOU signals for us and the health of the economy?
Well, thank you very much. I believe the MOU and I reference is the one with the bilateral creditors,
Yes.
which is the government and government-related institutions, which is why China, France, on behalf of the Paris Club, and on its own behalf, as far as China is concerned, we're heavily involved. And you will recall that first you ask about our history of reforms.
Yes.
Yeah, we do ask for the waivers, but waivers normally, when you say waiver, it is that, in the IMF you have conditions to meet as part of the release, and they are part of the trenches. So we can talk about, that where we are now later. But normally, when you negotiate with a fund and you are done and they issue the staff, that come to town, that's Ghana's team. Then once you issue, you can be certain that when they go back to Washington, they release their reports after internal review and then approval by the top management, and then we go to board. The first unusual thing is, you notice that we went to board, subject to France and China giving, waivers about certain things that needed to be done. The other element is that we had defaulted. I don't think the previous programs, any of them had come to that. It's an extreme position to default. We came close, but the HIPIC saved the day, and IMF and World Bank were involved, with HIPIC. So that's what I can, say about that. And the program under His Excellency President Kufuor had the HIPIC element, which was then being done, and the MDRI, multi-donor, which is the World Bank and the development partners getting involved. So then come the first review, if you remember again, and the two countries had to give another waiver for the board to sit. So it meant that there was outstanding work to be done as far as the debt restructuring. The debt restructuring had a domestic element, if you remember the DD, as you know it, with the haircuts, and other issues.
DDP round 1 and 2?
1 and 2.
Yes.
Then the second element is what is owed to the governments, and their institutions, Chinaism, Koreaism, and all those government-related institutions that lend on behalf of the governments. So that is what this MOU, and the board requires an MOU between us and them to say that we have agreed. The third element is the commercial creditors. We'll come to that. So what this means is that my reading is that, yes, there will be a board. I think the date has now been fixed to be, I think the release that came over the weekend and the holidays suggests June 26th, which is
June 28th.
June 28th, thank you.
So on that day, there are two meetings: Moldova, their fifth review under the ECF, and then Ghana's second review under the ECF.
Precisely, thanks. So this should have been May 1st.
Yes.
According to the program. So we are already, by the time the board goes, we are 2 months, delayed. The other element is, my understanding is that the board will meet, but there are elements which we have to finish negotiating with the individual countries.
Mhm.
And that means that it's not a completely done deal, but they're going to a point where they think that it should be possible, for Ghana to have a further discussion and iron out maybe a few things that may be left. For the board to meet, it means that, you remember there was a news flash which also said that there was some proposal from the commercial creditors, which was unsatisfactory, according to news on the ground, and also some hints that the fund was not satisfied because it didn't meet their debt sustainability analysis. Because ultimately, this whole program is about not just about supporting the economy with buffers, like the release that will come because it's in dollars may help, the forest slide, exchange situation and provide some foreign currency. But it's also to make sure that in the long term, the debt suspensions that are taking place, the haircuts and other things, will bring us to a sustainable, debt, situation. And so it meant that since the fund was in the forefront of many of these things, they had to be satisfied that they had this DSA, which they did. And I believe there will be another DSA that may have been done, is being met. And so that's where the other wrinkle, came from.
Okay.
So the good news, for the government and for the people of Ghana in terms of support, a bit of stability. I'm not saying, I don't want to be quoted as out of context as often happens. I'm not saying emphatically that, it's good news and therefore everything is, is rosy, if I may go to that extreme. But good news in the sense that at least an IMF program makes sure that certain targets and things are met towards the path to sustainability. So in the interest of the economy and as far as, temporary measures are concerned, yes, I think it's welcome.
But looking at this entire arrangement, this IMF program that we're under, would you say that there's a lot more leeway, or is a lot more relaxed for us than previous IMF programs that we were under, comparatively? I mean, if you reference what you had to go through with the IMF program as against this one, are you seeing a level of consistency, or there's been a certain wavering and leeway given comparative to yours?
Francis, I think you are pushing me to an area where, there could be a lot of controversy, with respect to,
well, facts are sacred, so that's just why I'm asking.
Well, facts are secret, yes, but I will say that let's look at ourselves first, then I'll come to the fund. In fairness to the fund and the bank, you remember when the situation came out clear in 2019 that the fund now refers as a pre-existing conditions, and going into 2020, when our program now, as far as the World Bank and the fund are concerned, is within context of the debt suspension initiative that they launched. You remember the World Bank president in particular said on 2 occasions that it was time for, Ghana to go, to the to go to the fund and the bank to do a debt suspension initiative, which we rejected on 2 occasions. One of which was very open. A bit diplomatic, but that is what it was then. So the fund has a mandate to member countries to make sure that they avert crisis. That's the way I'll put it. So what may seem to be a relaxation, I see more as prompting, a prompt, and a persistence that you need to do this. But for one country to feel it may have, like Ghana, it has implications not just for Ghana but for the continent, perceptions about our continent, which already, is not, the very best in many respects. We were facing ratings downgrades, going after the ratings agencies. In truth, when I was in office, we did oppose some of the, we did have a different view about some of the, ratings that came out. But that's your view, which often will not change. And they would have come and had discussions with you before those ratings come out. That's the protocol of it. They always send drafts and whatever. So, but if you insist to go your way, they may decide to also go their way, and that is what it is. So I want to put the relaxation context. Yes, there's a view that, they had been soft with this government on many respects but what could they have done? Cut, assistance when it would be only worsen, the situation. I think we have to learn a lesson from this. Categorically, we either go a homegrown full with all the sacrifices that to come. We have to get a program, for making sure that when we have crisis, we can tackle it ourselves without necessarily ruling out the fund. That's what the policy support instrument, means. But for DUMSO and the single spine issues, that was where the Ms. Mahama administration were going with the homegrown policy. You see where I'm coming from. And so now that we seem to be having agreement that some of the buffers and the Minister for Finance has said that as part of the discussions going on, they are going to be relying on the buffers, and he mentioned the sinking fund, because if you are owing, you must pay. And the fact that part of your debt is being suspended, you are suspending it for the next government. Most of it is for the next government. It's not wiped off like HIPEC, so you come back to it. And so what preparations are you going to be making to make those payments, right? And this was a situation we were faced with in 2013, 2014. We had been borrowing to pay single spine arrears. We had been borrowing, to support DUMSO and that's where the ESLA and other stories came in as part of our homegrown policy, which we discussed with the fund and the bank with assistance, we prepared with assistance of African Development Bank. So I think the short answer to what, after all these explanations is that we shouldn't, in ourselves, allow that situation to happen where we are so unprepared, even with minor crisis. Because remember, I say with minor crisis because before COVID, which was major, we had, ups and downs, but we also inherited 3 oil fields. Could we have used it to manage better? And one of which was the stabilization fund, which we used when COVID came. All right, so let us avert that situation. The fund and the bank will not always be soft, but even when they have been perceived to be soft, you see the consequences of it, of delaying, intervention, either by yourself, or with their assistance. So what I mean about the PSI, policy support instrument, is that we could have our own, policies, as we did the homegrown, that would tell us that if we are having problems, we must be saving and intervene. Contingency fund, stabilization fund, or when crude oil prices fell, we bought crude, kept it with boss. When the prices were going up, we were able to manage it well, which stopped, you remember 2015 when we stopped the petro queues, to date. Could we have continued with that? The big one being the sinking fund. So now you have to borrow for development, right? Just like, it's like mortgage, right? So you take a mortgage, a loan, and you stop paying, right? It will be repossessed. Incidentally, Ghana cannot be repossessed as a country, so the creditors have to come and have an agreement. It's up to us to say never again, And then, at the PSI, you are not, initially you say, let me try and manage this on my own, based on my buffers and other things which I'm creating. But when it becomes then severe, then that is when you go to the fund. Because they'll be doing, by the way, they will do Article 4. I always say, they will do Article 4.
And for those who do not know what Article 4 is, what are we talking about?
Article 4 is Article 1, 2, 3, 4 of the, of the convention that established the IMF and the World Bank. And anybody who signs to that Article 4 says that whether you have a program, you don't have a program, so long as you are a member state of the IMF, open your books.
So everything will be seen.
Yes. And if you lie about it, then that's where misreporting and other things come in. So they'll come in anyway. They come in for United States. They come in for Germany. Those countries also have quarrels with the fund. You just see things. You don't always have to see things the way the fund sees it. And remember, Article 4 was combined with our first review. It means that it's one and the same review that they are doing. So it was time for Article 4, so they decided to combine it. So they released a report which is an Article 4 and also a review of our program. So back to what we were saying, building buffers for me is very important. There were initiatives that were put, in the PRMA, most of the supports that will build along the way to have some protection are in the PRMA. Let's keep faith with it. Contingency fund, stabilization fund, heritage fund. Today we are transferring many things. Deferral, we did bonds, which are 40 years, 30 years. That's future generations. You can't be giving them liability without access. The heritage fund, we wanted to take it, for free SHS and the rest. Thank goodness there was such an opposition to that one. It didn't happen. We would have cleaned that also. So preparation is very important. Like the Asian Tigers, they started from somewhere, and some of the Colombia and others, you always face crisis, and that's where we what we have to do.
Okay, so based on what we know now, of course, the $360 million will come through after the review is done. What do you expect this to do in terms of how the economy progresses? Because in the first 6 months of this year, we've seen quite tough indices. Food inflation, the city's performance, tough. But does this review and the release of funds give us any indication that things could be better? Or we're still dealing with fundamental problems that, if not addressed, could put us in a bit more trouble?
Hey, remember after approval, we got 600.
Yes.
And then by November first review, we got another. So we're getting a substantial amount already. And then we are going to be getting something slightly lower now, 360. Not slightly, about half.
Yes.
So already we are at 1.2. Now, May would have been a good time to have gotten this money. Looking at our own, if we had gone in May. And it is for that reason that its release in June is not too bad. But to the extent that bigger sums of money that were released, could not help the situation, means that the structural measures are important. Some of them are in the program itself. For us to get out of the woods, and we cannot rely on just the IMF and the complementary World Bank budget support. Those are the big ones.
Yes.
African Development Bank also comes in. So it tells you and confirms that our problems are more systemic, very systemic. And that's why the fund went out of its way and said, hey, it's not just COVID, but there were pre-existing conditions, which we had. Why do I say this? Seasonally, we have seasonality in our economic management.
Yes.
And the period you mentioned from around November would have been useful together with cocoa, which was also became a bit of a mess, would have helped us into the dry season when we often have a tough time. So much of what was happening tells you that the releases and the money, World Bank support and everything wasn't sufficient because our own forest generation and our own ability, to be able to borrow for capital projects, and we are dependent on only T-bills. They don't happen. And that's why the economy went through that tough time. In fact, I say it applies to all governments, not as an excuse, for the current government, but frankly, it happens in every government. During our time, that's when we saw the city depreciate to about 3.6% or something, which was a big news. At the time we had to take a lot of measures to try and salvage the situation. So having gone through these turbulent times and continuing, This amount coming with the World Bank support requires careful management. And coming in June, it is coming at a time when the rains are good. They are becoming a bit excessive in some places, may destroy crops and the rest, but overall. And you know, the food index is very important. So the combination of that money coming in and a good harvest, you know, would help with both the inflation and the CD depreciation. So this is, you know, in terms of timing, this is why this is very important. And then hopefully, before we enter into the next dry season, I would hope that we would do the November review, which requires completion of the commercial creditors, completion with the individual bilateral, so that, you know, there is no further delay and we can meet the November deadline going into the rainy season. And that would virtually have completed the amount of money, you know, that's that would have been available. Yeah.
I remember the last time we had a conversation about the yo-yo of our city, you pointed us to a few indicators. In the first quarter, typically there's post-Christmas blues and then demand for Easter.
Yeah, that's a seasonality.
Yes.
I don't want to be repeating myself.
Then also the multinationals that repatriate their funds,
yes,
or their profits,
yes,
has a knock-on effect.
Yeah.
But if these are things that,
and then remember, I also mentioned that if you don't manage the cocoa board manage, which come in, you know, around October,
yes,
September, October, or latest November.
yeah,
And last year was not too good for cocoa board. So that flow, you know, worsened the situation.
okay. Now, if this is something that we always anticipate will happen, are you satisfied that the finance ministry has been able to manage these seasonal shocks as they should, considering where we are?
Let me say no, emphatically, because how do you manage it? Right?
You tell me. You're the former finance minister.
Yes, I'm posing a rhetorical question. You know, let me use our vehicle, which we propose, the stabilization fund. The stabilization fund says that before you come into this tough period, which is the toughest period in economic management for Ghana, you may be lucky with those commodity prices going up. You may be lucky with, depending on the global developments and whatever, of crude oil prices going down, and that's when you build the stabilization fund, right? With one oil field, we experimented, it worked. It worked fairly well, right? We had the crude oil price fall at the end of 2015 going to 2016. Our solution was Seth, to put that bridge there. The money was collateralized, you know, it wasn't applied to pay the IPPs and to ensure that there won't be power crisis and anything, you know. So that is what we could have been experimenting with 3 oil fields, which meant that if there was 350 million or so in the stabilization fund, could you then, with the tripling of the supply,
get it to over $1 billion?
Yes, right. In terms of output, 70,000 going to almost 200,000. Could you have, let's say even pro rata, could you have added 350, another 350 with a balance before 2020 when COVID struck? So the combination of COVID and that, you know, cyclicality which you are talking about, probably we would have had 1 billion, you know, to release from the stabilization fund. And remember, crude oil prices rebounded, so it wasn't just a quantity but a price.
Yes.
Gold prices also rebounded, and global economy started also getting, you know, more straightened out of the global financial crisis before COVID. That's the interval. So the reason I say no is that we could have been better prepared, and maybe if we had continued, we may have gone to the fund for, you know, considering the severity of COVID, maybe 300 million, 350, because we would have had our own 1 billion neat in the stabilization fund. Remember, 350 million was used immediately before we got the 1 billion. Of course, I have an issue, as you know already, with the numerous flows that came, which in my belief could have been used to resolve COVID, including the Bank of Ghana deficit financing.
Yes.
You know, so my answer is no. We did not seized the initiative, to prepare. And I'm saying emphatically no because the PRMA was debated fiercely. It took 1.5 years, or 1 year and a little, with the current government then in opposition. And some of the proposals that are in the PRMA actually came from the opposition side, to toughen. Yes. So, and at the time we all had HIPIC at the back of our minds because in as much as debt default is shameful, we were even back then, ashamed to be doing, the national conscience was not in support of HIPIC,
Yes.
which is why the Rawlings administration was waiting for the elections to see what could do, but had rejected it also because of Japan. It meant that you had declared bankruptcy. So my answer is no, we could have prepared better for it.
Okay. Be that as it may, are you seeing a clear shift towards us building our buffers again? Or we're still making the same mistakes?
We just made a promise. I don't, if you read, it was reported by Bloomberg, what the minister said, I tweeted, if I knew it would come up. If you look at Bloomberg, Ghana buffers, the minister was clear that as part of the debt, restructuring, they will bring back buffers and mention the sinking fund in particular as part of the agreements that they were reaching. So I would say, and in my tweet I say, there goes a GM initiative, being gradually accepted, something to that effect. But beyond my own, elation that some of the structural measures we have put in place seems to now be having consensus, which is what we would have brought back. I think GM has already said it, that he will bring back the buffers, we learn to pay and all those. So let's take it that now that the current administration is coming back and promising, I hope that as a nation we'll build a consensus around it. Definitely, you would expect that, we started it. So we should be given the opportunity to continue. Yeah.
Okay. Food inflation. Do you understand why the price of goods are this high? Grains have been good. However, we're not getting good prices for goods on the market.
Food is not in isolation. And so there are other pressures that come. So fertilizer supply, even have to buy it, the supply has to be there. I remember before entering, the rainy season, the deficit financing came full swing and hit the nation with inflation going about 55%. I think that was, you can't blame the typical cycle we spoke about for that. That had a cost, deficit financing and other measures that were taken, depletion of reserves and others. So I would say that there were very basic or fundamental, reasons for the inflation being where it is, and it's not going down it's not gone down, as rapidly as it should. All governments, wish for that single digit, inflation, for us to anchor the economy on a single digit inflation. Not a single digit below 10%, 9.5 or whatever. It will be somewhere between, maybe for us as an intermediate measure, somewhere between 5 and 6, at most 7, 8, not to cross the 10. We can't be overambitious and say we'll do a 2 or 3, which US has a policy, to do. So I would hope again that this is where the concern. So yes, coming into the rainy season, and we've been fortunate, in the sense that the current situation you are talking about could have been worse if the rains had not been good.
Really?
Of course, but we know it already that if the rains fail because of heat and all that, or drought, any year the food has not been good, it's been tough. If one of the seasons, the main season in particular, it's always been tough. It's only that the economy has been robust, to support it. But imagine there's no fresh food coming out now. But the fresh food is now taking on board, the cost of inputs, which were impacted by the deficit financing, inflation, which has not gone down rapidly. So that has now gone into the price calculation, and that is why it's looking stubborn. But I think that, I hope you get what I'm saying.
Yes, I get it.
So, I think if you analyze these things, you will see that they are related. That's why you manage the economy across. That's why you have the macro economy, which is not just fiscal, it's not just monetary, it's not just one sector, but the whole economy, which is the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance and Bank of Ghana.
Am I the only one who's puzzled that we have to depend on the benevolence of the rain to ensure that we have a good farming season? Because there are some who argue that maybe because we've always had that situation where the rains come, we don't suffer as much, and that irrigation and the artificial means by which we secure our food has not been properly explored. Is that a perspective that you share?
There's stabilization in our food situation, which we have to work on.
Yes.
You can see that I'm a believer in, counter-cyclical measures. Once you know a problem, what is it? Because before the bad time, often there's a good time.
Yes.
There may be short intervals and long intervals. So if you take the rains, it's going to be a year before you recover. Because if the minor and the major crops are terrible, right, then it means you are going to wait for the following year for the act of God. So what can we do? Farmer Services Company, as my president was advocating seriously. Remember, he said one tactical mistake we made in that direction was when the tractors came from Brazil and other, we distributed them. He wants to now create a pool, right? Now, first step, he says that should be linked to individuals who have the resources to be smallholders, right? To be smallholders and then buy the crop. So first protective measure, buffer stocks, right? Second protective measure, value addition, and if it's in excess, add value and export. And therefore, once you go into that, you are going to a superior trade model. And that superior trade model was the Exim Bank. Exim Bank was meant to look backwards to a financing, there are banks to financing domestic, but take that ED fund, give it as a loan, right? That's the model. Give it as a loan, like cocoa board does for cocoa farmers, provide them with inputs, and when you sell the crop, it generates forex. Only this time, Exim Bank had Chamber of Commerce, industries and the rest on board. So that aggregation that will begin at the farmer services level, the portion that can be exported, the creativity of some of our entrepreneurs, doing chocolates on our own and the rest, can we give it a boost? Because when I take chocolate and I'm traveling and I give it, I say, hey, this is raw chocolate. You can be sure that it's not been diluted with, artificial butter or anything artificial, but this is something because we produce it. Yes. So this is rare chocolate, dark chocolate. It's that's the origin and all those. So, Exim Bank in our model, was to look outward, where cocoa board looks outward for farmers. Only this side is going to look outward for those who are exporting already but needs export finance, right? Those who are going to be adding value. So you get your loan, in cities, from EDIF, and then you export, and then it is aggregated. You alone going to an international market to buy equipment for dollars of 10 million, unless you have a good tradition and maybe linkage with banks like Stanbic or Standard Chartered and others who can do the homework here before. But if you aggregate 10 for 200 people, right, talking about what? 200 times 10. That's what, 2,000.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's, so if it is 10 million, then you're talking about 2 billion. So you see, you are replicating the cocoa board model, but for private sector who can manage You know, the government has an input, government set it up, government will provide the export guarantees and whatever, but the repayments, like the cocoa farmers, for their inputs, is coming from what Cocoa Board, does, right? So it's taken up front. So the agri inputs has been taken care of. The cocoa fertilizer, the spraying, the insecticides for spraying and all that have been taken care of. So similarly, the difference is that you have more private sector involvement. That's why they're on the board. And they have the associations from Chamber of Commerce to AGI, and hopefully they will keep governments on the straight and narrow, so that we can achieve our objective. Francis, if you look at the BRICS and you look at the emerging economies, what we call the EMs, right, who have effective Exim banks and have been lending to us, right, they started in this way. Korea Exim, Turkey Exim, Benindes, that is Brazil Exim, US Exim, they started a long time ago. All this Exim, even Croatia and others, I'm saying even because I knew the beginning of that, they all came in, right, at a point, and they started setting up these structures, like the buffers we are talking about, So when we talk about, one of the phrases is the non-traditional exports, being the anchor. Yeah, it should be one of the anchors, but have we, enabled it? So that's what Exim Bank was supposed to do. It's not like it is a panacea for everything, but it plugs a deficiency. Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, same way. For a self-financing project, like, we did, and hopefully it's continuing with T3, with a port expansion, with a Ichabo processing plant and whatever. It is the oil money that was ring-fenced to pay for it. Could it have gone to a consolidated fund? Yes, it would have gone for another purpose once it gets in there. So we took it, ring-fenced it, right? So I'm saying that another hole is that government granting all these guarantees all the time. The board and others, the guarantees were added because there's no prospects for paying. We ring-fence the revenue to finance it, right? And then the thing is not to destroy it, but to make sure that you stick to it.
Okay.
And if the hard time comes and you have to restructure a loan that has this thing behind it, as for the market, refinance is part of, the whole issue. The way we refinance the balance of the Kufuor bond and the other, other loans that we took for the single spine and for Doomsaw and the rest,
Okay. Time check is some 27 minutes to now. You're listening to Morning Star. My guest this morning, former Finance Minister Seth Terkper. He's joined us for a rounded conversation. I wanted us to look now at our city's depreciation and how we're managing it. Some have already predicted that we could end the year with the cities. You need almost 17 cities to get $1. What are we getting wrong in our currency management as a country?
What are they getting right first? Is because right now, both inflation, and I take them together, because it's affected by this seasonality that I've been talking about.
Yeah.
So once we're out of the rainy season, we are in for hard times. And if we didn't create the appropriate buffer stocks and the rest, but I think I heard, the Greek ministry talking about some of these measures, So hopefully there's some consensus that is building. So we are locked out of the market. So the cost of borrowing is going to continue to be high. So if we are looking for support that is to come, and I haven't checked the relevant or seen the relevant amounts, which would have been revised, coming from the World Bank, the IMF, and the IMF we know, but the World Bank, African Development Bank, development partners, if we continue, with the fund program, then we may have to, manage those inflows to complement the IMF inflow. And hopefully with a good season, cocoa could come into its own, and therefore we could be able to manage, because I'm talking about forex supply, things that affect inflation, because we are depleted reserves. At the point we were just barely 1 month, of imports, including the core. So those are the measures which we know and which we must guard against and use whatever resources is coming now. And this is why reduction in expenditure is very important. It's not happening, fast enough, because if we keep that level, and the skepticism that is coming now is you are going to election year.
Yeah.
And
we are already in an election year.
We are in election year, yes. Sorry. We are in election year going into the elections, and the temptation to increase, expenditure meant that the depletion of, both domestic and external reserves. And that's why there's a prediction that the city will continue to suffer.
To depreciate.
To depreciate. We need to do more.
Okay. But
by the way, we did zero financing. We did a deficit was 6.1, just 1.1 in an election year. And
so you're saying it is doable?
It's doable.
But do you trust it will be done?
We owe it as a duty and responsibility to the nation and to Ghanaians.
Will the mid-year budget give you an indication of whether we would or not?
It should, because the mid-year budget mimics the budget, and it's subject to the Ministry of Finance providing reviewing its fiscal strategy document, which is supposed to have all these indices, right, and propose solutions, to the government before the mid-year review, and it's in law. So if we do all this, then we'll see some analysis of where the government thinks, we can be, and the remedial measures they are taking, in addition to the IMF measures, which are, remedial, by description.
How would you describe the gold for oil policy relative to its intention, as we were made to believe, to stabilize the city? Because a lot of the money that a lot of the forex was going towards import of petroleum products. So we're told that this program was supposed to help us reduce the pressure on our forex market. Is it turning out to be a good policy?
Has it helped the transport sector as far as the supply of crude is concerned? And did we build the buffers when they used the money to build the buffers when the crude oil prices were low, so that we could have managed it when the prices went up? And because we knew, we could have anticipated that global events will always come. And lo and behold, you had the Houthis and the rest, affecting what is going on in the Middle East, and the price has gone down, but it's gone down from 90 to somewhere, 80 something now. It's no comfort.
Yeah.
It's the 50s and 60s. That is what you can use, to manage. So, so friends, we should look at short-term measures, but it's time to start looking at the long-term measures as we had. When it comes to borrowing, when it comes to preserving forest reserve, when it comes to, completing the GRA reforms, that started with the measure of IRS and VAT, where is how effective? To say in this day and age that GRA hasn't got a domestic tax system, that's what's in the fund program, ITAS, which is the equivalent of ICOMS for the ESPO, West Blue and others, which was to have continued, right? It's, to say the least, unfortunate, right? So we need to have these structural measures, otherwise we'll be back having these conversations.
So does the policy by itself, is it a good one or it's not?
Which policy?
The gold for oil policy.
What's the difference? I give you crude, it's like giving cocoa. We did something similar with the Chinese, the Buddha.
Yes.
Right? At what price? Right? I have not seen a report, a comprehensive report. If you have seen it, maybe we can then use it to
benchmark.
Yes. So at what price? And what's the difference, therefore, in giving out the produce, which you would have given out in another way through the Minerals Commission, and that's another angle. So if you couldn't preserve those monies and build the buffers and things that are needed, what's the guarantee that just by the outputs of the commodity itself, we've been exporting already. So it's just another supplier cornering the market and negotiating the price, maybe favorably, Yeah, so I think for us the dynamics, what has changed is the mode of selling the gold.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I see it. The mode of selling the gold has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a typical barter, maybe in exchange for what, they come in and say we are, putting money into equipment for the refinery and other things, right? Otherwise, it's the same going into our reserves and the ministry using it to support borrowing, the two ministries, energy and to support borrowing and do the same thing.
Okay. The Ghana Grid Company and ECG announced last week that for the next 3 weeks we will have some challenges with power supply because of the WAPCO's, one of the suppliers for WAPCO having to do maintenance works for 3 weeks. What's your reading of this? Considering that at some point in our history, you had to wear 2 caps in managing finance and power as well.
And we had to clear those arrears.
Yes.
I would say what has become of the reverse pipeline.
Reverse from Takrady to Tema.
Yes.
We're told that is still in operation.
Yes. And the essence of that is the essence of putting that in is to tap, the gas supply from, we could, if we don't do the West Africa gas pipeline, and they are probably doing maintenance of the rest, how about Nigerian supply? Government to government. How about that? So I've not, I've been away, I've heard the thing, I've not read a full statement and what it means, but these are occurrences for which we could have prepared. In any case, where is the excess supply, which Mama was supposed to have created and given us such a headache? This is the time for us to use that excess supply.
But the excess supply will still require fuel to use, isn't it?
And it requires payment to the IPPs, which you didn't pay. With Tesla.
But it's your reading of this situation that, I mean, this was an announcement of 3 weeks, but we've had a sustained period of some challenges with our power. What do you put it down to? Is it more technical than financial or more financial than technical?
It's both. Most of the IPP money was offloaded from arrears where it was buried, ultimately to debt, considering the ISLA was issued. So the fund, program did that change, because if you look at the contract database figures that were, all of a sudden there was a sharp drop between 2021 report and 2022. We haven't seen 2023 report. But in between that, it changed, and the fund confirmed it. Yes, that it was in the fund document, is there. That is, debt sustainability analysis. So it increased, and then they were to negotiate it with the IPPs and pay. And understand there's been some agreement. So the issues, the problems are the same. You can give it different color, different name, different descriptions. They are the same from the past. That collateralization, which never paid the IPPs, and which continues to be, outstanding.
By way of payments?
Yeah. For which we created, the contract database, and for which, as far as IPPs is concerned, the term sheets from AfriExim should have been used to pay them, so that we can ease the situation and would have stabilized.
But many of these IPPs were providing a service and a hit of a crisis that after a while is build, own, operate, and transfer. So at what point does the transfer happen? So that it all becomes state assets for us to manage.
When they supply, the intermediaries, VRA, and then later the grid company and the rest, they then come in, and then it is then supplied to the weakest link, which is ECG at the time. We are bringing PDS, we are bringing MCC, and the collapse of all those things. And what I described, the flow of fuel and the payment from ECG, to pay for the IPP loans is what the World Bank guarantee, the partial risk guarantee, and which the word is coming out now, waterfall.
Cash waterfall system.
It was part of the cash waterfall system. And so when we started with S-Line, we paid the VRA, we told VRA that we are going to ring fence your repayments, which you have done in dollars to backstop the waterfall, which has a letter of credit at the time from Stanchart, right, to make sure that the supplies take place. And then we did ESLA and said we are going to use the ESLA to clear, IPP arrears so that that flow would continue and not stop, coming from doing so. Yeah. So that's it. So we are replaying again, like the sinking fund. We are going back and replaying. So two things, PDS collapse. So the investments that could have come from prepaid meters and from more re-engineering and then even using private sector, to be intermediaries for collecting the debt and whatever, being the supply, which many countries use, which is where the MCC money was to come in, collapse. So we are revisiting history for the sector.
How do we fix this long term?
You want me to be political?
Oh.
Vote for Mama.
What will he do differently?
I'm saying the structures we put in place, which is being, brought back. Waterfall, there's a promise to put it in place. Sinking fund, there's a promise to put it in place. Stabilization fund, put it in place. So what other justification do I have for saying that?
Okay.
And to be enhanced.
To be enhanced and made better.
Yes, by that I'm not saying that the problem I heard is, it's easy one, but he has agreed to take out the challenge.
Okay. The Bank of Ghana posted a 10 billion CD loss for 2023. The last one was 60 billion. Do we analyze it on that gradient, or you see things differently? Because some will say that if it was 60 billion before and it's now 10, it means it's much better. Is that the case?
It means maybe the financial reforms aspect of, the financial reforms aspect of the IMF program and the stabilization plan that they put in place with other financial institutions, may be working. But it can get worse before, it gets better. I remember they are supposed to be doing zero financing,
yes.
Which therefore means that they are not going to be financing the budget and can therefore use the money to support their own buffers. We may not see them doing some of the good things that, they kept with agreement with, governments like the Bank Hospital and the rest. Yeah, they may not be able to do that. But they ought to be on the road, mending their, finances. Because Bank of Ghana, and they are to the extent that they are the government's bank, and the reserves were depleted, and were there to rebuild it. And they suffered losses also, remember, from remember they offloaded part of their own borrowing. This story is coming out. Their own, not borrowing, their own profits and whatever, they offloaded them. Yeah, sorry, the borrowing from government. Yeah, let me get it right. The borrowing to government. Remember, they had to write some of them off, and that weakens their position. So, and then the whole depositors thing that was done, is still hanging, with the banks, and some of it is still not paid. So, Bank of Ghana has gone through quite a bit, despite the efforts. Yeah.
The banking sector cleanup.
Anyway, but let me just add that the one big thing that would help Bank of Ghana is the zero financing.
How would it help?
It would help in the sense that if the government hasn't got a means of putting pressure on BOG, as we also did with Cocoa Board and some of the monies from SNIT that we used to, which were tapered off, under the Ms. Mahama administration, then they will be able to build their balance sheet more firmly, because then they will keep, they earn some income. Even the income they earn, they pay part to the commercial banks, but what the reserves, when they require for monetary policy, controlling the financial sector so that it's not going, the reserves that they force the banks and others to force in quote, to keep, which every central bank does, earns them some income. And part of it, they declare as non-tax revenue to government, and then part of it is used to improve their balance sheets, and then part, whatever may be left, they do things like the CD hall in Legon, bank exchange, and some things they've done in other places, including basic schools and those ones are often not highlighted. But instead of, they're allowed to keep that money and do that for the, as part of their responsibility for ensuring stability, in growth, instead of passing everything on, to the government. So we should see BOG, granting more, being able to correct his balance sheet from that one single act of, zero finance. By the way, I am, that's why we kept it in the law. I'm a firm believer that, the 5%, borrowing to government, which is in the law, could have been, allowed. But it's, we argued that with the central bank, but through Treasury single account and others, we were able to maintain the zero, financing. But there should be a leeway for the bank, to provide some support to government.
The sector cleanup that happened, on hindsight, has it helped us?
No.
Sorry?
No. You see, there are two models. The big bang, right? The big bang is saying that, hey, there's this problem with the banks, and therefore, if you don't meet your requirement, close down. But then government takes on a lot of responsibility, because borrowing is always above. Borrowing is multiples of, the asset that the banks are holding, which they have to maintain a certain percentage, right? Secondly, from experience, global financial crisis, even the big countries, UK, Bestens and others, you remember?
Yes.
They made a collapse. Then the contagion effect was going to affect Bank of America and the rest, and they stopped. So I learned the lesson from that. The third, we had a model, we were convinced, which we did. One, VRA, when we used the ESLA money, we started using the ESLA money. When we used the ESLA money, the first flows that came in, we had VRA at the table. And they said, you couldn't pay subsidy, so we went to the banks to borrow. I was the minister for power. Okay, give us a list of the banks. It was almost every bank, which was supporting the economy. You can't, because government couldn't pay the subsidy, so they were borrowing to keep, the fuel supply. So we said, bring the banks. So the banks were at the table. There were 11 banks, 11 or 13. They were seated. The Minister of Finance was seated here with the Minister for Energy. I was in power, so double hard. But my good friend, Honorable Bois, was there. And so we said, okay, so we are going to give you 200 million. I think we gave 500 million, I believe, in cash. And then we had a discussion. We set up a technical committee, and they came back with a report, and they said, based on the ESLA flow, they could clear the monies owed to the banks, apart from the Senate one, the ESIM one, in 3 to 5 years. So we said, fine. So we set up an escrow, and we paid the ESLA in VRA, use that ESLA, the money to pay the banks. It was tripartite agreement. Those monies from the public sector, including the Ministry of Finance itself, I'll come to the second one, right, were the deposits that were impaired. So all of a sudden it started helping the banks, right, because to a extent that VRA was, Then, the ESLA had an enhanced road levy. So my colleague, Fuseni, did a similar thing. Brought the contractors, those who say they borrowed from the banks, okay, bring your banks. It's the same banks, right? So they negotiated 1 billion, right, of ESLA money, which was part of the enhanced road levy, and the first repayment was done. Why was it stopped? Why are we still owing contractors?
And that was in 2016.
2016, because the first flows, ESLA was November 2015, so the first flows were 2016. And all this happened between January and May, June. So we were sure that we will continue. Okay? So it meant that any institution, right, starting with public sector, right, who says, because of government action, we owe the banks. Then we paid it. We had an agreement, they signed off, and so they paid the banks. So we believe that this would have gone to continue to reduce, the obligations.
So if this plan had gone on, there would not have been a need for some of the banks to close?
Probably not, because we would have given them, the money. Remember, 2 points. The total liability for this thing was 2.22 or something, billion US dollars, which was considered in April 2017 after the new government came in. The current vice president and then Minister for Finance said in Washington, D.C. that they had enough money in ESLA. But what they would do is they wouldn't wait for the flows as we did to be paid as the ESLA came 3 to 5 years, but they would take a loan, pay off the IPPs, and that's a collateralized loan. The loan was taken, not the whole amount, but it was taken, but I can't answer for what happens then.
I see.
So I believe that we had a solution. Could some of the banks have been in such a terrible shape that maybe even the inflows, would not have been enough? We can't tell today. But we believe that it would have cleared a substantial part of the non-performing loans.
I see. So when the former president says that when they come back, an assessment will be done, and those whose banks were wrongfully closed will be reopened, how do you see this from the financial perspective and how to go about it?
Coincidentally, ESLA is still bringing. ESLA has brought in over 30 billion Ghana cedis. And ESLA is still bringing money. It's supposed to be bringing in some 40 billion. But the unfortunate part is that ESLA is part of the debt restructuring. So could you then take that out, right, with another negotiation, use the flows to backstop and pay the depositors, and that meant that the liabilities which made the banks to go down, would be partially restored. But I'm not in the core banking committee that's looking at this issue, but I believe that the recommendations along this line, because it didn't lapse. That's why what we are talking about. ESLA did not lapse after the 3 to 5 years, and it's supposed to lapse, somewhere in 10 years or so. There's no sunset clause.
I see. Okay. On the evidence between 2009 and 2016 and 2017 to 2024, Dr. Bamia is of the opinion that they have better managed the economy than you have. What's your response?
Can we have another session so that I can bring the figures?
Okay.
I have the graphs. I have the figures. So we ended deficit 6.1. How can your 12 to 15% be better than that? We ended debt 6.1. Sorry, yeah. We ended 67 approximately. Billion. How can your 100%, 67% approximately, how can your 100% plus be better than that? Right? There are many indices. Despite 3 oil fields, the highest revenue to GDP ratio was 15.4% or so.